My journey into paragliding began in the summer of 2018, when I learned to water ski. It reminded me of how much I enjoy learning, so I started looking for something new to take on. Flying had appealed to me since I was a kid, but I'd always put it in the category of things I couldn't do. Partly because of the cost, and partly because of my young kids. I realized those obstacles were gone, so I signed up for a course.
Jemně, jo, pojď, jemně. Tahej, ještě tahej. Tak, nech to, podívej se na něj, uspěláčka. A teď to povol a pořádně to vohu. Dlouhý kroky, přidávej, ještě přidej, ještě. Výborně, to bude pěkná ještě. To je ono. Zkus se tam nasednout.
I really enjoyed the course. I easily went up to Rana 8 times during a day, and I devoured the theory, during which I tried to figure everything out on my own and asked all sorts of questions. I don't think the practical part went particularly well for me, but when the instructor told me at the end of the course that he could see me flying up Makalu, low ENB, that was a reward for my efforts. I had my eye on this wing myself. The instructor recommended the Gradient Bright, a training wing, to some pilots. Within a month, another pilot and I also completed launches on the stationary winch and passed both the theoretical and practical exams. I received the pilot's blessing and took care of my pilot's license and other paperwork. I really started flying on the Makalu. After a few top-bottom flights and ground training, I began flying with a variometer and saving track logs. My instructor Mira encouraged me to write descriptions of my flights, which I actually started to enjoy. The flights that stand out most for me are when I looked out over the launch site for the first time and when I reached a kilometer in altitude during a thermal. Some people are afraid of heights, but I've found that the higher I am, the safer I feel, which makes sense when it comes to paragliding. Basically, for my entire first year, I flew only at Raná and Oblak. It's pretty close to where I live, you can fly there in several wind directions, I know the area well, and there are few obstacles, power lines and trees. I heard somewhere that in Britain, pilots can only fly in their home area at first, and only then are they allowed to take off elsewhere, which seems pretty reasonable to me. When the wind wasn't too strong, I tried a few times to complete the Raná graduation route, Raná, Oblak, Mila, Raná. Sometimes I bombed out along the way, sometimes I just missed it by a hair because I didn't quite make the circle at one of the peaks. After 6 months, I ventured outside of Raná for the first time to Surtak, and it was great. Actually, I'd already gone to Krupka once before, but the wind was at my back and a friend landed on a tree there, so I walked down. I spent the rest of the season back at Raná. At the end of my first year, I managed a few nice flights. First, my first real downwind flight to Nechranice. Then an incredible flight to Germany, my first flight abroad. And finally, my Raná graduation flight. At Osarangelov, I learned that being afraid to fly close to the hill above the trees doesn't always pay off. I flew far from the hill, where there was no rising lift, and because of that, I almost ended up in the forest. But it turned out okay, I managed to make it over the trees in the end. To help me better assess where to go flying, I created a plugin for Windy, which many other pilots have also come to love. It wasn't until my second season that I discovered the magic of local flying. Within 35 minutes, I can get from my apartment to 6 different takeoff sites. They're mostly lower hills below the 1,050-meter airspace, but you can still fly them well. The advantage is that I can wait at home until the weather probe starts showing good conditions and then head out. For Christmas, my son asked for a camera, which I've been borrowing ever since. At first, I didn't want the camera to distract me, so I didn't even want to fly with it. After a year, I've gotten used to it enough to pay it a little attention. I've really grown to like Řevničov, where I dared to do an XC flight over a gully for the first time while searching for a friend who'd landed on a tree. A few weeks later, however, I landed on a tree there, which was one of the worst situations I've ever faced while flying. I tried to fly between 2 trees, but my wing grazed one of them. I was falling down and hoping the wing would catch on the branches and slow my descent, which is what eventually happened. Thanks to landing on a soft, steep slope with a large pad, I wasn't hurt, but the wing needed to be repaired. Thanks to that, at least I managed to get through the first lockdown. For the first time since the course, I also tried a different wing, first the high ENA up Dena, then the mid ENB up Kibo. My friend and I managed to depart from Řevničov, but unfortunately we didn't get out from under the airspace cap in time and we scraped the bottom of it. Even so, I was really happy about it, both from flying with my friend and from departing from a 25-meter ridge. When watching other paragliding videos, I often miss the context. Where on the route was it? How high above the ground? What was the wind like? I'd often appreciate that in my own videos as well. That's why I created XCvid. At first, it was just a video display with an altimeter, then I added a map, and later a 3D view. I also added information about wind speed and direction from the forecast. This app hasn't found many users, but it was worth making even just for my own use. I often look for a specific moment in a video, and thanks to the integration with the track log, I can find it much more easily. In stronger winds, I tried to fly a triangle from Raná, but in the end I had to give up, and it turned out to be my longest downwind flight so far. For the first time, I headed to Kozákov, where I struggled more or less all day. In the end, I managed to depart in the evening from a single well-timed thermal. From Oblique, I managed what was probably my most beautiful flight ever. A triangle to Most and back, a low-altitude save. A conservative decision to abandon the FAI triangle leg, a return flight to Oblique above the ridge soaring pilots at Raná, absolutely beautiful. A few days later, I wanted to repeat something similar at Sertak. I fought my way against the wind on Makalu, flew as far as Buková, but I bombed out on the way back. Even so, it was a nice flight. From Sertak, I then flew my longest flight ever. First, I took off right when the wind picked up quite a bit. I realized in time that I wouldn't be able to push through, so I turned back and headed for a landing.
Ale v téhle vejšce nevím, jako. Já to nepřeladím, já mám displej rozbitý. Jo, jděte, no.
But I didn't let that discourage me. I took off again into the slightly weaker wind and flew 111 kilometers all the way to Plzeň. The wind helped me cover the distance between thermals faster. I navigated well using the clouds, and when I made a mistake once and fell out of a thermal, I managed to recover from low altitude thanks to luck and patiently thermaling in a zero. I weaved my way through the airspace, landed safely, and took a comfortable train ride home. I tested the pod harness and the high ENB up summit and decided that this was the combination I wanted to switch to. I planned to send my son to a course, and if he wanted to fly, I'd give him my old gear. But in the end, his mom didn't let him take the course, so that fell through. After a few years of flying to the end of Řevničov and back, it occurred to me that if I flew it twice in a row, the total distance would be worth more points than a single return flight. I managed to do that, setting a record for Řevničov that still stands today. For the first time, I'm bringing my paraglide on a family vacation to the Krkonoše mountains. On non-flying days and in the mornings, we go on hikes. In the afternoons, I usually head up the hill. I fly almost every day. Right on the first day, I manage a nice triangle. There's a hike and fly competition that day. Most of the field is hiking on the ground, but I'm flying beautifully outside the competition. I even dare to make my first flight from needy vrch registered on X contest and land right next to the cabin where I'm staying. I manage a few more average flights. Once, I fail to depart in time from under a cloud, and it sucks me in for a few seconds. It's only thanks to my compass that I get my bearings and manage to get out of it. Once, I land nicely in the valley near the cemetery. After my return to Prague, I managed to fly from Karlik to Staňkovka. I'm very happy with this short XC flight, even though it ended with a botched landing at a gas station. I head to Italy for a SIV course, flying on a rented Summit, Trango, ENC, and Sigma, ENC. My collapses are going great, full stalls are a disaster, spiral dives and the spin are fine, and wingovers are below average. I practice deploying the reserve parachute and even managed to cancel the main wing. I can handle emergency situations. I successfully passed the sport pilot test so I can depart from a hill in Switzerland, which requires a 5-star IPPI license equivalent to our sport pilot license. I don't need to fly ENC wings yet. I think the Summit will suffice for me for a few more years. After SIV, I'm heading to the Alps to fly for the first time. In the early years, I didn't want to go to the big mountains. It seems to me that the potential for complications is greater in the mountains than on the flatlands. You need to know better how the air behaves, where it flows, understand the valleys, and adapt your flight accordingly. Near steep cliffs, the risk of turbulence is greater than, say, at Raná. In Pinzolo, I manage one pretty nice flight. At Colradella, first an average one. But then I take off with a cravatte, and while trying figures on the last flight, I'm already telling myself I'll have to deploy the reserve parachute. Among other things, the fatigue from the whole week and that particular day probably took its toll on me. In the end, though, the wing handles the complications and I land safely. Right after my return to the Czech Republic, I get tangled up during takeoff, but fortunately without any consequences. After the season ends, I look back on the interesting moments and wonder if there's a way to put them together. I've never wanted to edit videos, I can't pick music, and editing takes forever. So I upload the unedited videos as is. But then it occurs to me, what if I just read the commentary I've already written? I look for an audio recording program on my computer and see that it can also edit video. I read the comment, add some fitting footage, and it's done. That didn't even hurt. I start to really enjoy it and edit a few of my more interesting flights this way. It even found some viewers. At Řevničov, I try flying behind the end of the ridge. It works on the way there, but I can't make it back. Still, I'm glad I tried. A few weeks later, I reach the end with low altitude, make a bad decision, and have to make an emergency landing in a clearing. A day later, I manage to take off from the gully. After a few more attempts, I make it back to the launch site from there as well. In mid-February, I manage a nice thermal flight. Admittedly, just around Barun, but I'm still really happy about it. Covering that airspace in winter like this really counts.
Nad letadlem.
After 6 months of hesitation and waiting, I'm switching to a Summit and starting the second chapter of my flying career. I have a few resolutions, the main one being to keep more margin. I've never completely burned through the airspace, but I've come close a few times. I usually managed to fly out from under the cloud, but I also ended up in it for a while. I usually made it over the trees, but once I landed on a tree because of it, and I landed in a clearing a few times. In stronger winds and gusts, I usually managed to stay stable, but once I ended up in a tree right after takeoff because of them. I don't consciously take risks, but rather I don't realize them. That's why I need to leave myself more margin, even if it still feels fine to me.